Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is another video on React Router 7, and we're focusing on the framework version, which is basically what Remix got migrated into. And so what I'm going to do in this video is I built this app using React Router v7. I've integrated Supabase into it, and so I'm going to first walk you through the app. I'll highlight places in the code that I think are important to understand how to get React Router v7 as a framework to work with Supabase. So along with the documentation from React Router here, and remember it's focusing on the framework, there's also this document. Let me zoom this in a bit. There's also this documentation that I use as a reference, this server-side rendering, which is a new approach that Supabase has recommended for integrating with solutions like Next, SvelteKit, Remix. So these are the two resources that I'm using. Hopefully you'll find this video helpful. Please make sure you like and subscribe, and hopefully just stick around to the end. So first let's take a look at the app. So I'm not going to cover setting up a Supabase project. I have a Supabase project. Let me just touch on the README a little bit. I have a Supabase. This is the README that's with the source code that I will deploy. I've already set up a Supabase project, but if someone wants to kind of do this on their own, I've included the table script on how to create a table. I also am using row-level security, so I've included all the scripts that you need to get row-level security to work with this application. Okay, let's try to go through the application quickly first, and then we'll walk through the source code. All right, so I've already created an account, so I'll just log in. You can see I can log in. So now that I'm logged in and my session's being managed, if I go back to the main index, it will redirect me here because it knows that I'm logged in. If I'm logged out, I cannot get back to my home page because once again, it's managing that and it's redirecting me. So that's the basics. And then, so now I can log in, and then the other part is I wanted to demonstrate now that we have Supabase authentication and we're managing our sessions appropriately, basically, how can we, on the server side, so i.e. actions and loaders, how can we call using the Supabase client to access your database and all of Supabase's additional services. So that's why I built a basic CRUD example, so we can go to our CRUD example. Basic, there's a name and description list, so I can say a name, a description, I spelled that wrong, description, we can add an item, we can edit an item, description more. So I added it, I edited it, and then now I can delete it. And so all of those actions are happening on the server side in loaders and actions. The only thing that's happening on the client side is the authentication, and that's happening on the client side because we need to create the token and store the cookie, and then from there the cookie can get kind of passed to the server as needed. So that's kind of my quick description and of the app. Also, like I said, the source code will be available. So let's take a look at the source code. Let's kind of, once again, just revisit how we got started on this whole thing. So I'm not going to go through the process of how we got started. But basically, we're using the framework here. I ran the npx create React Router latest. I got the template app, and then I started to build upon it. Let's take a quick look at how we set up our routes initially. So we'll look at the routes. And we just kind of laid them out with the default configuration here. So we have our main index page. And actually, what I'll do is I'll look at the route, and then we'll go to the page. So we have our index page, and if we look at our index page, all our index, let's give ourselves some more room. All our index page is doing is it's kind of like a controller. It's sending you where you need to go. So we are getting our Supabase client. And kind of let me show you that code. That's a function that I kind of created. And this is a good time to take a look at the Supabase code that I use as a reference. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using this code here as my reference, this creating a Supabase client for SSR. So it basically manages the cookies on the client side for you, and then it shows you how to get access to the session information when you're on the server side, and you use the session information on the server side to leverage the Supabase client. You set your environment variables as you normally do, and then you create a client. And we're on the server side. So this is kind of the old remix code, but it's pretty much the same as the new stuff. So let's just hop over to the new stuff, and it's right here. I created this method, get server client, because I knew we need to call the client multiple times. We create this header because we're going to need the header for the response. We create the server client, we pass in our variables that we got from our environment file. And then these are just methods that we pass in to kind of manage the cookies. So this is the get all to get all of the cookies that got passed in with the request. And this is the set all to set the cookies that you need on the response. So that's this kind of utility function called get server client is what I use to get access to the Supabase client in my loaders and in my actions. Okay, so now back to where were we? We were in our index. All right, so we're getting our client. So SB is my server client, and then I get a user, and then I determine if I have a user or not. If I have a user, then if I don't have a user, then I redirect to login. If I do have a user, I go to my home page. Any other error for now, I'm just logging it out and redirecting to login. So that's the first page of our route, of our routes. Let's close my index page, and let's close my server TS because we already discussed that. And let's go back to our routes. Let's kind of go in order. So let's, well, not in order, let's hop to my login page. I tried my best to, well, I didn't do it, I used some AI to generate some JS docs so it's documented as best as it possibly could be. Once again, for people who've used Remix before in the past, a lot of this stuff looks pretty much the same, just kind of changed where you're importing things from. Here's a meta function to kind of display the stuff at the top of the page in HTML. Now let's just take a look at what our loader does first. There's some Remix magic happening here. Once again, all this is derived from this documentation. So this is the example for when you're on the client side, how you get the Supabase client on the browser side, but you also need to get the environment variables from React Router. And so what we're doing here is that in the loader, we're doing our normal get server client call, which I've done before, which I already explained to you. We determine if we have a user. If we have a user, we just go home. If we don't have a user, then we're getting our environment variables from the server. We're setting them on its environment. We're passing them back in our loader. And then our loader gets access to the environment variables. And why we need our environment variables here is that we need to actually log in. And you log in on the client side, as I mentioned earlier, because we need the client to set up the cookies and a token and everything, and then it just gets passed back and forth between the server and the client so that the server knows who's authenticated and how to manage a session, because all that information will be contained. Let's quickly talk about the form. Basic form that we have here, we're capturing email, we capture password, we have a link to go to the register page, and then we display our error at the bottom. On the form submit, we call a post. Our method is a post, and then but on the submit we call our login function. In our login function, we have our event. We do prevent default. We capture our form data, convert it to an object, and then we call this create browser client function, and we pass in our environment variables that we just pulled from our loader up here. And then we create our browser client. This probably should be in a try catch in case this thing throws an error. Just maybe I'll clean it up. So now I have my Supabase client, and then I just call my Supabase functions as I normally do. So I do Supabase auth, sign in with email, sign in with password, pass in email, pass in password, get my response. If error, set console error. Otherwise, if I have a session, then I redirect to my home page. This call here will set up the cookie and everything, and all the session on everything on the client side, so that when requests are made to the server, it will get passed along, and then the server can kind of extract that stuff and do what it needs to do. So let's hop back So let's close login. Quickly, let's hop on. Let's touch on register since it's going to be very similar. All right. So this is our register. Only difference, we have our username, email, password, link to go back, but we still have our submit button here. And then on submit, we're just going to call our post. And so by default, the post will call our action. So now this is our action, and very similar as before, we're going to pull our form data from the request. So now, because remember, now we're on the server side, so we're going to pull our form data from the request, get the values, and then we're going to use our helper function, our get server client. Now we have a Supabase client. And then now we're going to do our auth sign up. We're going to create a user using the email, the password, and then we're going to associate a username with that. And then the same thing. Errors, return the error message. Otherwise, return the user data. Probably should redirect by default to the home page here. But like I said, another catch that I just made, maybe I'll update the final source before I deploy it. So now we've covered the register. So let's close the register. And so let's take a look. We did route, index, we did register, we did login. Let's just take a look at the home page. That's pretty straightforward. So this is where you end up after you've been authenticated. We've already discussed the meta. Let's take a look at what we have in our action function. So the only action we support on this page is there is a logout button inside this form. So on logout, calls our action, once again gets us to the client, we call the sign out, we redirect back to login. The other action on the home page is, as you can see in the loader, we get our server client, and if we don't have a user object, we redirect to login. Otherwise, we return the user data from the current user. We pull the user data off this loader. You can see on our loader, gives us our ID and our user object that we're going to get back. And we render the user's email here. And from here, we have our link to look at the CRUD stuff. So you can see here's a link to go to the CRUD page. I think also that's our last page. So yes, it is. Let's hop to the CRUD page. This one's got a lot going on, but it's really following the same pattern. Just as a refresher, that is this page. So of course we have the HTML to render the input, and then we have the HTML to render the list of items. No real magic here. We'll go through the HTML first. We have our link to go back home. We render our error message. We have our post. Remember, the post will call the action for the page. There are some interesting things we're doing here, so let's kind of touch on this. So this screen is managing creating new items and editing items. So we need a way to know if we're creating a new item or editing items, and that is what this state is we have here. This is the current item that's either being edited or created. This is how we're managing those values. This will determine if we're in an edit mode or not. And this gets set, so let's just put something in here. Clicking the edit button here will set this flag, so then we know we're in edit mode. So I click to edit, it knows we're in edit mode, and then we take the content of this item and we push it up into the UI, which is current item. So that's how we're doing, that's what this editing and current item are being used for. This resets the form on a change, so this is kind of where we clear everything out. So after the action happens, the save or the create, we clear everything out. So we set the current item to null, we set it is editing to false. So this is the handle edit click I just mentioned, which sets the current item and then sets the flag so that we know it's in edit mode. Cancel edit kind of clears it out, so that's this, cancel edit. And then now we're back to the body of the file. So We need a couple of values passed to us when we call the actions. We need to know, is it edit? Are we editing item or adding an item? So that's a hidden value that'll get passed along with the post. If we're editing, we need the ID of the item because we need to be able to update it. If we're not editing, we don't need an ID. And these are just input fields that capture the values. So we're just capturing the values here. And then if editing, there's this cancel button that appears, otherwise it doesn't. It's mostly just a submit button for the submit. And then this is our list of items. So let's talk about how we get that. So our list of items are being passed in from our loader data. So we get our items, and if there's any error gets passed in also, but that's our loader data. And it's just, it's the usual map, get items, loop through it, render the content. Then we have our click item. So on the edit click, we pass the object, so we know what object to set in here. We have our delete. We have another embedded form here. So when you click the submit button for this form, it will pass it an ID. It will set the action type here, so we know what the action is, delete item. Because we're managing all of the actions you can do on this page through the action function. The examples you normally see, what they do is they just have a route, a delete route, but I wanted to keep this simple, so I just threw everything into the action. So let's go up to the action. Okay, like I said, the action is pretty heavy, got a lot going on here. Quickly take a look at the loader. You can see we get our server client. Now we have our server client, and then we're doing our regular Supabase API calls. So I'm just saying, give me all the items in my items table, return the items, items get returned as loader data, and they get rendered. But here's the action function, which is a really complicated one. Not complicated, it's just one that has a lot more going on. Get a Supabase client, get my form data, determine what my action type is, and then we just basically have this if statement. Probably could be a switch, but an if. Let's just start with the add item. From my form data, get the name, get the description. This is just some console logging, and then just call my Supabase client to add the item. If I have an error, console log my error, send my error back as action data, and then it'll get rendered on the page. Otherwise, return the data that was just. This could be cleaned up to actually return the object, because right now this insert is not really going to return any data because I'm not telling it to return any data, right? I'm just saying just insert the item. All right, so down here on the edit item, probably got the same thing on the edit item. And let's see, we covered our add item. We do our edit item. This time we get the ID passed in because we need that. We get the name and we get the description. And then we just, once again, call the Supabase call, get the item, update it with the new values, make sure the ID matches the ID gets passed in. Same thing, if error, return error message, otherwise return data. Delete item, get the item you want to delete, call a Supabase function, delete the item, verify it's appropriate item based on the ID. If error, return error, otherwise return data. And then this one I think I actually did. And then if none of these action items matched, then return invalid action item. And that's the whole CRUD component and what's happening on this page. Just looking back at this code, we probably do want to return something from here. So what we can do is we can switch this to a select. So tell it to kind of select this result afterwards. And then we should get an object back here for data. And then what we can do is we can set our data based on that. And we can say if my data, and then what we'll do is we will just check the length, right? And so if we have something, then we'll return that, otherwise we'll return null. We could probably do the exact same thing down here. Let's see. True. No, that's kind of weird because it's always returning an object. So we'll return null. All right. So now we're definitely returning something after each one of these actions. But that kind of wraps it up here. Once again, as I said, I have a full README here that kind of explains everything that's going on, references back to the documentation that was utilized, and then also I will upload the source code for you to go through yourself. Hopefully you found this helpful. For those who've used Remix in the past, they've done a wonderful job migrating it. It's pretty straightforward. Only major change really is you get your type safety now with the loaders and the actions, and then also you can manage your routes kind of with this approach. Thanks. See you next time.